Good afternoon, and welcome to the University of Regina's Research with Impact series. Today's presentation, Surfing in Troubled Waters, Mindfulness for Mood Management in Uncertain Times, by Dr. Shadi Beshai, is the fifth in the virtual lecture series that we've been offering this summer. My name is Lisa Mitchell. I'm the Associate Vice President of the University of Regina's Advancement and Communications team, and it's my pleasure to be your facilitator for today's presentation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're virtually gathered on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, and Nakota peoples, and the homelands of the Métis. University Advancement, together with the University of Regina's Lifelong Learning Center, has been offering the Research with Impact series to our alumni for the past 3 years in a traditional in-person format. But as we all know, COVID-19 eliminated opportunities for in-person events. So we decided to try delivering the series in a virtual format instead. Our experiment to go virtual with Research with Impact has been a huge success. Unlike the in-person events, going virtual has enabled us to reach and engage many of our alumni from beyond Regina. And today, for our fifth in the lecture series, 115 people have registered, including people from throughout the province, as well as other areas throughout Canada and around the world. To those joining us for the first time, or even the fifth, welcome. In case you missed or would like to see the previous presentations again, we've posted all of the previous lectures, including our most recent by Amy Zarchekny's June 9th talk on stem cell research on our website. You can access it from the University of Alumni and Community Engagement webpage. Some exciting developments have occurred in the last week for two members of the University of Regina community, and I'd like to just take a moment to share that with you right now. The wonderful news is that amongst the newest recipients of the prestigious Saskatchewan Order of Merit are two very accomplished members of the University of Regina community. Our Chancellor and alumna of the U of R, Ms. Pamela Klein, and our distinguished psychologist, our very own Dr. Gordon Edmondson. Pam and Gordon embody what it means to be engaged citizens and caring members of our province, living our motto at the University of Regina as one who serves. And they'll be invested into the order later this year in a formal ceremony. And now, let's move on to the reason that all of you have joined us today, to learn about mindfulness of mood management during uncertain times. Before we begin, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items. Please keep your audio on mute and your cameras off during the presentation. The presentation by Dr. Beshai will go until approximately 12:45 p.m. Regina time, after which you'll have some time to answer questions. Throughout the question, we encourage you to post any questions you might have for Dr. Beshai via the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. It's a little green button, and if you can post your chats and post your questions to moderator Kylie Dahlstrom, that's D-A-H-L-S-T-O-M, rather than to everyone, that would be helpful. Kylie will then review the questions and share them with Dr. Beshai shortly after his presentation ends. We'll do our very best to get to as many questions as time allows. And now I'd like to introduce our fifth speaker in the University of Regina's Research with Impact series, Dr. Shadi Beshai. Dr. Beshai is an associate professor in psychology at the University of Regina. He is also the director of the Depression, Cognitive and Cultural Lab, and he's a registered clinical psychologist in Saskatchewan. His research is focused on improving access to and the promotion of evidence-based psychological treatments for adult depression and anxiety. Dr. Beshai has published several peer-reviewed scientific articles on the cultural adaptation of cognitive behavioral and mindfulness-based interventions. He has also published extensively on improving public literacy about these interventions and ways to disseminate them more widely. Dr. Beshai's research is funded by the Canadian Institute of Health Research and the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. Today, he'll be talking about mindfulness, compassion, and other evidence-based techniques to help manage distress during the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. Welcome, Dr. Beshai.
Hello, all. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that we can get going. Here we are. So welcome, and thank you all for joining me here today to discuss how to surf the troubled waters of today, of our time today. And hoping today we delve a little bit into a few simple steps that I'm hoping anyone can do at home, again, to help manage mood-related issues and this great disruption to our moods and routines that has come with the current crisis of COVID-19. So thank you again, Diane, for this great introduction. My name is Shadi Beshai. I'm a registered clinical psychologist and an associate professor of psychology at the University of Regina. I just want to let people know that the slides today will be available. So if you are interested in the slides, or if you've missed anything that I talked about, or I talked about it too fast, please feel absolutely free to email me and let me know that you're interested in the slides, and I'll make them available. And I think Diane let me know that she'll make them available for anyone who emails her as well. So I'm happy to do that. So without further ado, here's what I'm hoping to talk to you about today. First, and for the sake of definitional clarity, let's discuss what depression, anxiety, and stress actually mean. I'm also hoping to give you an opportunity to take a look at some of the depression, anxiety, and stress related symptoms and issues, which you can actually do a self-assessment of, and hopefully that'll give you a good gauge as to where your mental health is today. Okay, so that's the first section. The second section is we talk specifically about the current COVID crisis and how that has impacted and will continue, unfortunately, to impact mental health. And then finally, the section that has the most amount of nutrition, if you will, is the section on putting on your armor, putting on your psychological armor to hopefully manage emotions in the uncertain time of the COVID crisis. So here we go. First, let's call a spade a spade. Let's define depression, anxiety, and stress. So the first thing I want to let you know about is, if you take anything at all from my talk today, I want you to take this. It's easy to forget that on a talk in which I'm describing or discussing how to manage emotions, it's easy to forget that emotions are actually really quite healthy and really quite natural. Sad moods, such as depressed mood, anxiety, stress, all of these things are perfectly natural and perfectly normal human reactions and human emotions. And the reason why we all feel emotion, of course, is it serves a survival purpose. So emotions are like as I like to think about them, are kind of these encoded impulses that help you make decisions in the here and now, but also about future events. Okay, so they serve a survival function, and I'll give you an example. So if you see this bad boy here, right? So the king of the jungle here, if you encounter a lion in the savannah, as our ancestors have in the past, your body will ready you for fighting, fleeing, or freezing. Okay, so there's a bunch of hormonal changes that happen to your body that ready you for this task you're about to embark, and again, help you survive. So I just want to set the record straight, if you will, that these emotions are perfectly natural, perfectly normal, and again, they have a survival benefit or survival advantage here. Okay, again, it's readying your body for some kind of a fight, and so this is in relation to anxiety and stress. For mood, on the other hand, we usually experience sad mood or the symptoms of depression or sad mood, especially after we experience some kind of a large loss. So the survival benefit of having a sad mood is basically to help you recuperate some of the energy expenditure that happen as a result of your loss. So it's a mechanism for you to withdraw, retreat, and kind of lick your wounds and recuperate your resources. Of course, it's all great and dandy until these emotions, such as sadness, depression, anxiety, and heightened stress, they're all perfectly natural until they're happening out of context, until they're happening way too intensely, and until they're happening for longer durations than is helpful for your survival. Okay. So as far as I understand it, emotions are perfectly natural. Don't listen to anyone who tells you otherwise. However, when they're unmanaged, when they're a bit out of context or disproportional, they can cause a big impact on people's lives. Let's start with a definition of depression. And when depression is used anecdotally in our everyday language, it could mean a deep sense of sadness, a deep sense of loss. You know, it's someone's way of describing themselves as being down in the dumps or especially blue. When people like me talk about depression, clinical psychologists, usually what we mean by that is that we mean a psychological condition that is associated with a constellation of symptoms. I'll show you what the symptoms might look like here, right? So these are some of the symptoms of depression: having little interest or pleasure in doing things, feeling down or depressed, having trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, feeling tired or fatigued, having trouble concentrating, etc. So when these issues happen together in time for more days than not, for 2 weeks or longer, and again, they're impacting your day-to-day, you could be diagnosed with something we call clinical depression or major depression. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the sense of fear or foreboding. And the sense of fear and foreboding could be associated with either a very specific situation, such as being in crowds, such as social or performance-based situations, such as fear of embarrassing yourself at a party, for example, or fear of public speaking. Or the fear could be about a specific thing or object or animal, etc. And we call those phobias, things like spider phobia, snake phobia, injection, blood, heights, and flying phobias. So the anxiety could be associated with a specific situation, or it could be this kind of hazy fear or foreboding that is not really associated with anything in specific. So for example, that is something we call generalized anxiety or generalized fear. And the generalized fear is usually fears or excessive worries that happen about a bunch of different aspects of one's life. So worries or excessive fears about finances, about performance at school or at work, about relationships, etc. Again, it's hazy. It's not really tied to one thing or another. Or the fear could be about fear itself. So the physiological manifestations of fear itself, and when that manifests and it's quite severe enough, someone could be diagnosed with something we call panic disorder. Stress is similar to anxiety, of course, but it's a bit different in that stress is the physiological and psychological tension or reaction that one feels when a known stressor out there in the environment is believed or perceived to be taxing to one's natural coping resources. Okay, so example, a dooming deadline or a looming deadline or looming examination that may be coming up, or a meeting with the boss that you're really dreading. So all of these things are perceived, if they're perceived to tax your natural coping resources, they can be associated with the physiological reactions to stress that we talked about. So the physiological reactions or features of stress look very similar to anxiety. Again, it's your body readying itself for fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay? So it's your body getting ready to take on a task that you perceive to be quite taxing or quite difficult on your coping resources. And stress in and of itself is not a psychological condition. And like I said earlier, these concepts or these constructs, when they happen at a manageable level, they're not associated with anything that is too disordered or anything that is abnormal. But what happens, unfortunately, is that when these issues become a little bit overwhelming, they start, again, rearing their ugly head in our everyday life and impacting the things that we do day to day. And unfortunately, modern society, especially when it comes to stress, is really ripe with these really low-grade low-grade stressors that are constantly there. They're not high enough for you to be constantly aware of all the physiological tension and reactivity that you would get from encountering something as dangerous as a lion, for example. But your physiological reactions go up a little bit and they stay there given the presence of this low-grade chronic stressor. And this type of low-grade chronic stress can add up and cause problems later on. Sometimes we experience really severe stressors, things that really, really tax our coping resources. We call those traumas. And when that happens, especially when someone encounters a life and death situation, encounters some kind of physical or sexual violence, or is a victim of something like that, then somebody could actually go on to develop symptoms of a condition we call PTSD, which is a stress-related disorder reaction. And PTSD is typified by numbness in one's emotions, problem sleeping, fatigue, issues with recurrent intrusive memories, etc. So how common are these issues? Well, they're quite common pre-pandemic. And in fact, at any given moment, anywhere you look in the world, millions of people are currently suffering from pretty significant levels of depression and anxiety and relatively debilitating levels of heightened stress. These issues know no geographical bounds. They know no, they don't care about wealth. They don't care about culture. They don't care about race. Everybody at all points in time is susceptible to getting issues and getting challenges such as depression, anxiety, and increased stress. Okay. And even non-clinical levels. So I give you a bit of the clinical definitions of anxiety and depression and stress earlier on. Even non-clinical levels, even everyday levels of depression, anxiety, etc., can cause quite considerable impairment and quite considerable distress in the day-to-day. And for that reason, really, it would be in our best interest to keep these issues at bay and learn some of the very easy and simple methods, or at least they're easy and simple in the sense that they're very straightforward. They're difficult to implement, of course, especially in times of great need. But they're simple enough to implement on a day-to-day basis to keep these emotions at bay. And what I've done here is I've uploaded some of the self-assessment measures here for depression, anxiety, stress, and COVID-19 fear. And I've put all these together and uploaded them on my personal website. And what I could do is I can either email you these if interested, or at the end of the talk on your own time, feel free to access these. I'll keep them up probably for a week or so. And what I also have here is a bit of a guide as to how to make sense of these scores once you do get them. Okay, so what do the scores actually mean? This is a bit of a guide that will help you understand where your current depression, anxiety, and stress levels are. So the next section here is about context. And of course, the current context in which we find ourselves is ripe with challenges to our mental health. What are some of the unique challenges in the time of COVID? First of which, and as you can probably already experience, the effects of COVID on mental health can be put, if you will, in two larger categories. So there are the mental health effects that directly relate to the disease itself, so the COVID itself. So things like death, loss, things like changes that we're all experiencing, or the problems or challenges to mental health can be put in another category. And these relate more to the interventions that we've actually put in place to try and curb the infection rate of COVID. So the social isolation and social distancing measures that we've put in place. So first of all, the direct effects of COVID itself. People really crave a sense of direction. People crave a sense of purpose in their life. I'm sure you understand. And the crisis in which we live, it really brought about wholesale destruction of our future plans. Some of the most valued humanly created structures that we really rally around and we really believe in. Okay. Not knowing what comes next is understood as one of the core human fears, and it's a core fear that is associated with heightened depression, heightened anxiety, heightened stress, really all of it. So when people really lose a sense of direction for themselves, and especially those that have a very hard time tolerating not knowing what the next steps are, will find the crisis even more disconcerting and even more problematic. And we know that this tendency to fear the unknown or not tolerate uncertainty is associated with heightened, like I was mentioning before, associated with heightened anxiety, stress over time, and perhaps for the same reasons of fearing the unknown, people have a very hard time with change. Okay, since the practical steps that I'll be given at the end of this talk focus mostly on mindfulness, I wanted to focus on two mindfulness-related concepts that are very pertinent to this discussion. The first of which is the concept of clinging, okay, and the second of which is the concept of aversion. We could be unsatisfied with the present moment in one of two ways. We could really want it to last, so we could enjoy and get great pleasure out of the present moment and really try to cling on to the present moment and wanting it to last, expanding it, okay? And then the second is to actually be averse to the present moment, wanting to change the present moment. So saying, I can't stand this, I need this to end. So this usually happens when we're going through a particularly difficult time. And unfortunately, both of these tendencies to want to cling on to pleasurable moments, I want this to keep going, I wish this never ends, and I need this to go away, I can't stand it. Both of these things shroud the present moment with mystery and with stories that may not be correct. Okay, these stories, at least the story of or the model of mindfulness tells us, these stories often miss the point of reality, and they act as what mindfulness calls the second era of suffering. And the story of the second era of suffering is such, is that we all go through painful experiences in our life, but some of us, unfortunately, in fact, most of us do this, especially when we're untrained. And again, we're still early in in the early days of trying to manage our mental health and our emotions. What ends up happening is that we create or we fabricate stories about the pain itself. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening now? There must be something wrong with me. You know, why can't I stay happy I must not be built for happiness. I'm never going to find somebody that the situation is such now that there's just never any hope. The emotions that I feel, I'm going to feel this way forever. This is what Buddhists as well as mindfulness scholars call the second era of suffering. Not only are you experiencing the pain of the present moment, and we're all going through it, right? The pain of, like I was saying earlier, the wholesale destruction of the structures and the planning and all of it that we've worked so hard to maintain over our lives, and the destruction of our plans, the destruction of, some people are struggling with finances right now. Some people are struggling with, death and disease of loved ones, etc. It's a very, very challenging time. So that is pain. There's no question that is pain. Nobody can ever lie to you and tell me that's not pain. And we all go through these experiences, of course. And in fact, It is part of the fabric of being alive and being human, is to experience pain and suffering. But the problem with the problem, of course, is to create or fabricate additional stories about this pain and additional stories about what that pain must mean for me. Okay, and that is really something that we want to get away from. And in fact, mindfulness, what mindfulness teaches is it helps people meet the present moment, no matter what that present moment looks like, no matter how troubling that present moment is, with a sense of courage, with a sense of, you know what? I will accept this, no matter how difficult it is. I will accept this, no matter how fleeting these moments of happiness are. There are, of course, other challenges, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. Okay. And the other challenges here being is that the situation makes us feel very hopeless and very helpless. And both of this makes us feel powerless and very small against this gigantic task that's ahead of us. So as I mentioned earlier, we need a sense of purpose and we need a sense of direction and agency to be able to function as best as we could in life. And the COVID crisis really shook our sense of meaning and our sense of purpose and control to the very core. And it made us realize that as much as we believe that we're in control, there are really larger factors and larger forces at play here. Of course, the other direct impact of the COVID crisis on mental health come in the form, as I was mentioning earlier, come in the form of loss. So losing loved ones, losing your plans, losing income, etc. So all of these are very unique and tough challenges on one's mental health. And this is not an exhaustive list of the direct effects of the COVID crisis on mental health. But of course, there are other set of issues here brought on by the COVID crisis, unrelated to COVID directly, but are brought on by the social isolation and social distancing measures that are appropriately needed to try and kind of stop or curb the spread of the infection. And some of these issues, of course, include many of the deleterious health effects of loneliness and social isolation. We know from a large body of research that loneliness, social isolation, they're associated with increased depression, associated with increased anxiety, stress, higher rates of suicide amongst older adults, higher rates of substance use and unhelpful coping, right? Distraction, other things that we know really are not very helpful in managing emotion. Again, like abusing substances, for example. And of course, loneliness and isolation are often very much associated with a number of other psychiatric and physical health conditions. And as we've all been seeing the reports, and it's really unfortunate and really sad, but social isolation can also lock people in already fairly abusive and fairly tumultuous relationships. So the social isolation and the social distancing measures, as we're understanding now, are associated with an increased rate of domestic violence and abuse, child abuse, substance use, as I was mentioning earlier, depression, and anxiety. So a lot of, unfortunately, bad news, and we really won't be aware of how much impact the COVID-19 crisis will create on mental health, I believe, until the dust of the situation, settles a bit. But there are some preliminary evidence here, which is suggesting that symptoms of depression, anxiety, symptoms of or signs of really heightened stress are on the rise given the current crisis. So there's a meta-analysis, and for those of you who don't know what a meta-analysis is a large study that summarizes findings of a number of different studies that have been published. So they're fairly robust and reliable in helping us figure out what's going on. So there's a recent meta-analysis that showed that significant portions or significant symptoms or levels of depression and anxiety are affecting anywhere from 16 to 28% of the current population. There's one study in China that found that anxiety and depression rates were 20, 35%. Sleep difficulties were affecting 18% of the population. And there's actually some evidence now to suggest, and we'll come back to that point when we talk about what we can do to manage mental health during this crisis. Time spent focusing on COVID and COVID-related matters, and time spent researching this issue, unfortunately, was related to higher levels of distress. So again, it's really important here to in the fight or this battle to maintain one's mental health in this time of crisis. Obviously, it's very important for you to keep up on what's happening in the news and the latest information on COVID-19. But with that comes a bit of a burden. And in fact, I would recommend that you try and keep that to a bit of a minimum as much as you can. So the final section of the talk now, which is putting on your armor. So these are simple steps with a focus or an emphasis on mindfulness and self-compassion here. Simple steps to help you manage some of these tumultuous emotions that we're all going through currently. First thing, don't listen to anyone who tells you otherwise, but it's really okay. It's really, really okay. Again, if you take one thing out of my talk here today, I want you to leave with this particular point. It's completely fine to feel like crap. And in fact, feeling like crap, feeling these negative emotions can help you connect with what you value the most. Because if there is an intense negative emotion that you're experiencing, likely it's in relation to some kind of pain or some kind of loss that you've experienced related to something that you care about deeply. Okay? So it's totally fine to feel, to have a few days where you feel like crap. We are experiencing very, very difficult, very tumultuous events, lots of social unrest and lots of issues. So it's really, really completely okay for you to be feeling whatever it is that you're feeling right now. And it's also important to remember that you're not alone at all. As I mentioned, and I'll just go back to the slide previous here. So this meta-analysis showed that close to 30% of the population are going through similar emotions and similar kinds of distress that you could be experiencing here today. The second thing that I'm hoping to get across here today, and something that I'm hoping you're able to do, is make a list of names. And even if it's a very short list of names, make a list of names of people who you can actually reach out to who have an interest in your well-being. So people that are consenting, willing partners that are willing to listen to you, just to talk about as much or as little of what's going on with you as possible. And again, if you take anything away, I want you to remember that it's perfectly normal. Whatever it is that you're going through is perfectly normal and totally okay. And likely is that a lot of people are going through exactly what you're going through. And many people just don't know how to start that conversation. So, a great first step is for you to be here, but I think an even fantastic next step is for you to be able to share some of your concerns, again, as much as or as little as you're willing to, with somebody that's willing to listen and is concerned about your well-being. Third thing that I would recommend is for you to do something. Do anything, okay? And you could do something that you really enjoy. So you can plan to read a book that you've had for a while that you haven't had time to read. plan to watch a movie with loved ones, plan to watch a show, play a board game, play video games, anything that you enjoy. Okay? And the other flip of the coin, maybe do something that's a little challenging, something that you haven't done before. Learn a new skill, a new task, learn a new language, learn a new instrument. Lastly, in this particular section, exercise happens to be very, very good for your mental health. So there's really mounting levels of support now for this idea that exercise can actually stave off a number of mental health difficulties. And if you're active for more days than not in a week, there's some evidence that exercise can actually function as a kind of a low dose antidepressant. So kind of a very similar effect to a low dose antidepressant medication in helping you manage your mood and your anxiety levels. So exercise is very important. Any kind of movement, any kind of activity that'll get your heart rate going. Okay, so remember to schedule these tasks in. Okay, so it's really hard to put off taking care of yourself because, I mean, let's face it, there's very little time, and there's a lot to do that needs to be done. But you won't be able to do some of these things very effectively if you're not taking care of yourself and taking care of your emotional well-being. And for that reason, you want to make sure to schedule some of these pleasurable and mastery or challenging activities in your day. Other things happen around these things. These things don't happen around other things. So it's important for you to schedule and to stick to that schedule when it comes to doing activities such as these. Fourth thing that I would recommend is limit access to information and screens. Use screen time. This is a iOS feature that's often used. Use screen time if necessary to limit your access to screen time. Maybe check in with someone for accountability. Okay. As I mentioned before, the more time we spend thinking about and reading about COVID and some of the difficulties that we're going through today, the more the likelihood that our mental health will be affected. You also want to set what we call worry time. This is a session that you schedule in time to just completely dedicated for you to actually worry. And it sounds a bit strange and counterproductive. However, people who suffer from excessive worries often worry for many, many hours throughout the day, and it's completely unstructured. So they find it quite helpful to set aside a particular time, perhaps half an hour a day, where with a piece of paper and a notepad, where they're actually thinking ideas out loud and writing down some possible solutions. And people who do set aside worry times find that they find themselves worrying a lot less than people who don't have any structured worry times. Okay. Practice self-compassion. And compassion is very, very similar to self-compassion is very similar to the concept of compassion towards others. And compassion towards others, of course, means to recognize the suffering of somebody else and having the motivation or the being moved emotionally to actually reduce that suffering for them. So this type of passion can be turned inwards, and we call that self-compassion. It's recognizing your own suffering and being moved to alleviate or to reduce the suffering for yourself. And the concept here, the idea is that you want to meet particularly difficult times with a sense of self-kindness instead of self-criticism, those feelings of warmth towards yourself. Meeting challenging times with a sense of common humanity, understanding, for example, that the suffering that you're going through right now actually connects you to other living beings and other living things, because we all suffer, of course. And then finally, having the ability to recognize when you're in a moment of trouble and you're a moment of suffering. Okay, so the differentiation here is between mindfulness of suffering, so the appropriate recognition of what's going on in the present moment, versus being really over-identified with the suffering. So this is when you miss saying, Or this is when you say, I am sad, I am stressed, instead of I feel sadness, I feel stress, which are, of course, different things. So these are things that you're experiencing, but they're not who you are. They don't define you. You're not over-identified to them. And I have some instructions here as to help you write a compassionate letter to yourself. I know it sounds silly, but a lot of people find it quite helpful. And I have instructions as to how to do a self-compassion break. And this is really the idea of bringing up a concept to mind that is, or a situation to mind that is quite difficult and stressful, such as the COVID crisis, and sitting with the emotions and kind of instructing yourself to recognize the pain, say, you know what I'm going through is stress. This is stress. Give it a name, call it, label it. Recognize in that present moment of your recognition of your own suffering, that suffering is a part of life. Everybody's going through it and you're not alone in that suffering. And then finally, allowing yourself to have some kindness towards yourself, to give yourself a break, if you will. Repeating mantras to yourself, such as, may I be kind to myself when I need it. May I give myself the compassion that I need in the present moment. And then finally is the idea of mindfulness. And it gives us about 5 minutes to talk about mindfulness. And I mean, I did a whole course on the concept of mindfulness. So of course I will not be able to do justice in about 5 minutes, but it's deceptively simple. And the direct roots of the definition simply mean lucid awareness of what is occurring in the present field of awareness. Another translation for it is remembrance. Remembrance to do what? It's actually to remembrance to pay attention on purpose to the present moment experiences with an attitude of curiosity, with an attitude of balance and acceptance, okay? You're meeting the present moment exactly as it is, without any need to change it. And the way I like to picture it or imagine it is, imagine yourself wading through water, and you realize that you can completely let yourself go, completely relax all your muscles, and accept where you are, and you'll still be able to float just completely fine. Okay, so it's an encounter with the present moment with a sense of befriending curiosity. The way I like to think about it is, if you've seen the movie E.T. before, Extraterrestrial, Steven Spielberg film. If you remember, when he came to Earth, he was thrilled by pretty much all the little things that we've learned to take for granted, right? And this is what researchers in mindfulness, as well as Buddhist scholars, call a beginner's mind. So you want to come to experiences as if for the very first time. There's a bit more here for me to talk to you about mindfulness. I know I'm running out of time. So what I'd like to do is do a very, very short meditation with you, hopefully maybe 2 minutes in the time that we have. And then I'll open it up for questions right after that short guided meditation. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Ask you to lean back in your chair, put both feet on the ground, and rest your hands or your arms gently on your lap or on the desk in front of you, whatever it may be. And I want you to take a couple of deep breaths. And just allow your eyes to close. And I want you to become aware of the present moment by simply just noting the sensations of sitting. So direct your attention to perhaps the pressure that you feel in the back of your legs, in your butt, in your back. Just notice what you do, in fact, notice in that point of pressure between chair and your body. No need to change anything, just become aware of it. And when you're ready, I want you to start paying attention. So kind of bringing that muscle of attention and awareness towards the process of breathing itself. So become aware of the sensations of breathing, where you feel these sensations of breathing most distinctly. So for some people, that's in the tip of the nose. For others, that's going to be in the falling and the rising of the abdomen. And you want to hold your attention there. What does the in-breath feel like? What does the out-breath feel like? I want you to follow the sensations of breathing with your attention from the moment the breath begins to the moment the breath subsides. Cover the breath with your awareness. There's no need, of course, to change anything. Just be with it, whatever it may be. Completely submit and accept your breathing sensations and whatever else that may be going on for you right now. Of course, you'll notice that your mind can be lost in thought as you try to focus on your breath. That's completely natural, completely normal. Minds are made to wander. When you do notice something like that, just gently but firmly escort your attention back to the sensations of breathing. Again, wherever you felt that breath most distinctly here, either it be your tip of your nose or the falling and the rising of your abdomen. See if you can notice these sensations and experiences for the very first time. The sense of openness and curiosity. If your mind wanders 17 billion times, bring it back to the breath 17 billion times. To notice when your mind has been lost in thought and to bring it back to the sensations of breathing is in of itself an act of mindfulness. When you're ready, become aware of your surroundings. Perhaps taking a couple of more deep breaths. And bring your full attention and awareness to the here and to the now. Thank you all. I hope this was helpful. I know that I didn't get to cover a lot, but like I said earlier, I'm happy to share these slides with whoever needs them. And I'm happy to provide you with some guided meditations as well if you found these helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Beshai. Kylie, do we have any questions queued up for Dr. Beshai? And while you're getting those to him, I just want to say thank you. I did that little meditation with you and I feel like I just had a 3-hour rest. So I'm refreshed and ready to go for this afternoon and I needed that. So thank you. Are there any questions? If you go into your chat function,
Oh yeah.
It might be in there for you.
How high are the rates of suicide through the LGBT communities? I'm not an expert in LGBTQ related issues, but as far as I understand, the rates of suicide and deaths by suicide in that community are quite staggering, quite high, and quite serious. I can't give you the actual figures and the numbers, but I'm happy to find that information out. With that, though, there's no question that many studies have been done on this particular topic, and many agree that the rates of suicide are much higher. And again, the rates of depression and anxiety are higher in this particular population as well. Again, it's very difficult to live in a world that doesn't really offer that kind of acceptance and support. And for that reason, people of the LGBTQ community find it quite difficult. But of course, many don't as well. So it's important to know the resiliencies also of that community. Another question here is, if somebody stops eating and drinking, what stage of depression are they in? How can someone help? Well, so if somebody completely stops eating and drinking, that could mean a sign of really deep or severe depression, clinical depression. It could also mean a number of other issues that could be going on for that individual. So first of all, you'd want to do a thorough investigation, a thorough assessment with that individual to actually figure out what might be going on with them. But if it is depression that is their primary concern, it sounds like it's more severe forms of depression. And we know that, of course, disruptions in appetite and sleep are important features and important symptoms of depression that a lot of people go through. In terms of how to help, it's difficult to tell, given that I don't know that person. With that, everything that we talked about here today should help. If the depression is severe enough, a lot of people with severe forms of depression and anxiety, they benefit more from seeing somebody like myself on a regular basis, on a one-to-one therapeutic basis, of course. Okay, so the resources are there, and I'm happy to give people resources as needed. Our very own Dr. Heather Hedges-Stavropoulos is the director of a very large online CBT center that provides services to people all over the province. And as I understand, this is a free service. So I'm not sure what the wait list times are right now, but they're not so terrible. I would say maybe a couple of weeks to a month in terms of wait time to get you into a low intensity or internet-based psychotherapy. And I think that would be a very, very important way to go for this particular individual. Hopefully that helps a bit. How would extroversion help in stressful or depressing situations? Would introverted people have any advantage over it? And yes, so the research actually supports the idea that extroversion, for those of you who don't know what extroversion is a particularly stable personality characteristics that is typified of people who are more likely to, they're more outgoing, they like to be around others, they're more energized in the presence of others. And there's some research pointing to this particular trait, having this tendency to be outgoing and to be around others, is helpful when it comes to, or is protective when it comes to mental health. So people with higher rates of, or higher tendencies to extroversion actually show, on average, less depression, less anxiety symptoms, etc. So there's a bit of a protective effect when it comes to that. With that, though, people who are depressed or people who are extroverts or introverts both can and do get depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions. Oh, thank you. Thank you for posting that. So Diane just posted the link here for the online therapy user, the thing that I was just talking to you about, which is the ICBT that is directed by Dr. Hedges-Stavropoulos. I'm trying to find other questions here. Am I an advocate of meditation as a stress reliever? Yes, I am. And this comes from both my own experiences as somebody who practices mindfulness, but also comes from a plethora of research studies showing that meditation is very effective in reducing or managing high levels of stress. So I highly recommend mindfulness and meditation for this particular purpose. Again, it doesn't work for everyone. It's not a panacea, right? So some people may not find any benefit at all. But as far as I understand, the majority of studies show us that it is quite beneficial for the majority of people, at least. And much like everything else, mindfulness is a skill, right? So the more you engage in these meditative practices, the better your ability will be to manage your emotions and be able to, instead of just being reactive to everything around you, you kind of develop that space to be a bit more responsive to the world around you. So you don't jump into these automatic reactions that you're so used to over years and years and years of conditioning and repetition. What are signs we should look for in others that their stress and depression have gotten to a dangerous level where they need professional help? I mean, there are many symptoms that one could look out for, and hopefully you all have an opportunity to visit some of these self-assessment measures that I've put up here. But the symptoms of depression, as I mentioned, things include loss of interest or pleasure in things that you used to enjoy. If from an outside perspective, the person with or more severe forms of depression, they could talk less, they could eat less, as mentioned earlier, they could be sleeping very poorly. So these are all signs that something could be off with this individual. It's very difficult to know what kind of problems the person could be facing without actually talking to them about it and doing a more thorough assessment. But with that, there are some telltale signs that somebody could be struggling and in need of mental health. And if you familiarize yourself with the symptoms, you might be able to get a gauge as to what kind of struggle this person might be having. It's as I mentioned, and I want to mention again, it's tough to know from the outside. There are some signs that are very, very obvious, and there are other signs that are tough to gauge from just looking at a person on the outside. So I would recommend that somebody who is self-reporting these symptoms would see professional help, especially if it's in a severe form. If not, I would recommend that the person start something like ICBT, or we've created a treatment, for example, that is mindfulness-based called Mind Up, something like that in the interim to get them started in managing their mood and anxiety issues. How often would you say per week, per day to dedicate mindful activities? So the research on this suggests that if you dedicate about an hour a week to mindfulness practice, that you can see a lot of really good gains. It's a dose-response relationship, meaning the more you practice, the more you put these things into effect by practicing, the bigger the gains are going to be for you. Okay, so there's not a threshold per se, but you want to do these things as often and as frequently as you can. Final question here. Where do you start a mindfulness journey? I would start with your breath. Okay, so if I were you and I was just starting out, I would maybe dedicate just 5 minutes of your time a day just to sit down and just inhabit the present moment, maybe inhabit your body. Okay, so I would start maybe with there, and then I would gradually move towards paying attention to things like the sensations of the breath. At first, maybe you want to try to count the breaths. So some ancient Buddhist texts here that talk about counting breaths as a way to anchor you within that breath and not having your mind wander way too much. So that would be a way to start. Just start maybe with 5 minutes, count breaths to anchor you within the breath if needed. Just very, very simple stuff that you can then ramp up and do more with, that will teach you eventually about yourself and how your mind is actually working. And that is really the point of mindfulness, is to give you a look under the hood, if you will, of your own consciousness and what are some of the reactions that you get to certain things, and whether these reactions are patterned and cyclical in the way they manifest themselves. And these are all the questions. I thank you all for making the time, and I enjoyed this talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beshai, and thank you to all of you for joining us today and for your great questions. A video of today's research with impact lecture will be posted to the alumni section at uregina.ca/alumni, and it will be shared with you probably within the next day or two, so that you can view it at your leisure or send it off to your family and friends if you think it's something that they would find value in. And don't forget to register for the final presentation of our Research with Impact virtual lecture series. It takes place on June 23rd. The title of the lecture is Planet 9, that's the number 9, or Planet 9, N-E-I-N, the German 9. Discoveries in our outer solar system, and our presenter is Dr. Sam Lawler, Professor of Astronomy at Campion College and in the Department of Physics at the University of Regina. Until then, be safe, be healthy, and continue to practice social distancing and other pandemic-related restrictions. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Beshai, and to all of you, have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.